The Phantom Actor of the Roman Theatre. A story from Orange, France. The discovery, the afternoon sun, cast long shadows across the ancient stones of the Roman theatre of Orange. When the French archaeological team made the discovery that would forever change their perception of what was possible. It was September 15th, 1924, and the excavation led by Professor Henri Dubois had been progressing methodically for 3 months, revealing secrets buried beneath centuries of sediment and oblivion. The theatre itself was a monument to Roman engineering prowess, its massive stone wall rising 37 meters into the Provençal sky. Built during the reign of Augustus Caesar, it had witnessed countless performances, political gatherings, and historical moments that had shaped the destiny of southern France. The acoustics were so perfect that a whisper from the stage could be heard clearly in the highest seats, a testament to the architectural genius of its ancient builders. Marcel Fontaine, a 26-year-old archaeologist fresh from the Sorbonne, was working carefully in the eastern section of the stage when his spade struck something that was neither stone nor earth. With the precision he had learned during his studies under the renowned Professor Martineau, he began excavating around the object, using brushes and delicate tools to avoid damaging what appeared to be a significant find. The young archaeologist had come to Orange with dreams of uncovering Roman artifacts that would establish his reputation in academic circles. His thesis on Roman theatrical architecture had earned him recognition among his professors, and this excavation represented his first major field assignment. They had spent weeks studying the theater's history, poring over ancient texts and architectural drawings. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. "Professor Dubois," Marcel called out, his voice echoing against the stone walls that had witnessed theatrical performances during the Roman Empire. "I believe I've found something extraordinary." Professor Henri Dubois, a 60-year-old man with a gray beard and penetrating eyes that had seen countless archaeological treasures, approached, quickly followed by the rest of the team. Dr. Elise Moret, a specialist in Roman art, whose expertise in ancient frescoes had made her invaluable to the expedition. Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, the expedition's official photographer, whose innovative techniques had revolutionized archaeological documentation, and Pierre Leclerc, the local supervisor who knew every stone of the theatre as if it were his own home. Pierre had grown up in the shadow of the ancient theatre, playing among its ruins as a child, and listening to his grandmother's stories about the voices in the stone. His family had lived in Orange for generations, and he possessed an intimate knowledge of local legends and folklore that proved invaluable to the academic team. What Marcel had discovered was a small metal box, rusted by time, but surprisingly well preserved. It was buried barely half a meter deep, in an area that, according to historical records, had been used as a dressing room during the last theatrical performances of the 19th century, before the theatre was completely abandoned for archaeological excavations. The box itself appeared to be made of tin, with intricate engravings that suggested it had once been a precious possession. With expert hands and cotton gloves, Professor Dubois carefully opened the box. Inside, wrapped in a silk cloth that disintegrated upon contact with air, they found a photograph in perfect condition. The image, clearly dated 1918, according to an inscription on the back written in elegant script, showed the theatre stage during what appeared to be a theatrical performance. "This is impossible," murmured Dr. Moreau, adjusting her wire-rimmed spectacles while examining the photograph with the trained eye of someone who had spent years studying historical artifacts. "According to our records, the theatre wasn't used for performances after the war had interrupted all cultural activities in the region." The photograph showed the stage illuminated by torches, their flames creating dramatic shadows that danced across the ancient stone back. The stands were partially filled with spectators dressed in period fashion, women in long dresses with high collars, men in formal suits and top hats. But what left the team completely bewildered was the central figure, a solitary actor in the center of the stage, dressed in a white Roman tunic that seemed to glow with its own light. His face was clearly visible, but there was something about his features that was disturbing, almost supernatural. "Look at his eyes," whispered Jean-Baptiste, the photographer, with a trembling voice that betrayed his usual professional composure. "It's as if he's looking directly through the camera, directly at us." The actor in the photograph appeared to be about 30 years old, with dark wavy hair that caught the torchlight, and an expression that combined deep sadness with an intensity that transcended the image. His posture suggested he was in the middle of a dramatic soliloquy, one hand raised toward the heavens, the other pressed against his heart. But most unsettling was that his eyes seemed to follow the observer, regardless of the angle from which the photograph was viewed. Pierre Leclerc, who had grown up hearing whispered stories about the theater's supernatural inhabitants, visibly pallid upon seeing the image. His weathered hands trembled as he reached out to touch the photograph, then quickly withdrew as if burned. "Mon Dieu," he murmured quietly, his voice carrying the weight of generations of local folklore. "It's him. It's Lucien Beaumont." The name resonated in the air like a ghostly echo, seeming to bounce off the ancient stones and return to them transformed. Al present knew the legend of Lucien Beaumont, the actor who had mysteriously disappeared in 2018 during the last unofficial performance held at the theater. According to local stories passed down through generations of Orange residents, Beaumont had been a brilliant actor who had come to Orange fleeing the horrors of World War I, seeking refuge in the art and beauty of the ancient theater. "The legends say he died on this very stage," continued Pierre, his voice barely a whisper as if speaking too loudly might summon the spirit they were discussing. "That his spirit never left the theater, that he still performs for invisible audiences on moonlit nights. My grandmother used to warn children never to come here after dark, saying the sad actor would try to recruit them for his eternal performance." Professor Dubois, a man of science and skeptical by nature, examined the photograph with a magnifying glass, looking for signs of falsification or manipulation. His trained eye searched for evidence of double exposure, retouching, or any of the photographic tricks that had become popular in the early 20th century. But the image appeared authentic in all technical aspects. The photographic paper corresponded to the period, showing the characteristic grain and tonal qualities of 19th emulsion. The chemicals used in development were consistent with the techniques of the era, and there was no evidence of retouching or montage. While the team debated the implications of the discovery, none of them noticed that the shadows in the theater had begun to move strangely, as if responding to an invisible presence walking among the ancient ruins. The temperature had dropped several degrees, though the afternoon sun still shone brightly overhead, and a subtle change in the air pressure made their ears pop, as if they were ascending a great height. As evening approached, and the team prepared to return to their hotel in the town center, Marcel felt compelled to take one last look at the photograph. Under the fading daylight, he could swear that the actor's expression had changed slightly, becoming more intense, more direct. The eyes that had seemed melancholy in the bright afternoon light now appeared urgent, almost pleading. But when he mentioned this to his colleagues, they attributed it to the changing light conditions and the emotional impact of the discovery. That night, as Marcel lay in his hotel bed, listening to the distant bells of Orange's cathedral marking the hours, he couldn't shake the feeling that the photograph was somehow alive, that the ghostly actor was trying to communicate something urgent across the barrier of time and death. In his dreams, he found himself standing on the ancient stage, watching a performance that seemed to blend past and present, reality and nightmare, in ways that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The days following the discovery of the photograph were marked by feverish investigation that consumed the archaeological team. Professor Dubois had contacted colleagues in Paris, sending copies of the image to experts in historical photography, an unexplained phenomena. The response from the academic community was immediate and intense. Never before had such clear photographic evidence of a supernatural phenomenon been discovered in an archaeological context. Auguste Flammarion, France's leading expert in paranormal photography, had examined the image using the most advanced techniques available. His preliminary report, delivered by telegram, was both fascinating and disturbing. Image authentic. No evidence of manipulation. Spectral analysis reveals light frequencies not visible to human eye. Recommend immediate further investigation. Meanwhile, Dr. Moreu immersed herself in Orange's municipal archives, searching for any official record of theatrical performances in the archive building, a medieval structure that had served various governmental functions over the centuries, contained records dating back to the Roman occupation. The musty smell of ancient parchment and the whispered conversations of elderly clerks created an atmosphere that seemed to bridge the gap between past and present. Marcel Fontaine, who had made the initial discovery, found himself obsessed with the photograph. He had set up an improvised laboratory in one of the rooms at the Hôtel du Théâtre, where the team was staying, and spent hours studying every detail of the image with a magnifying glass and under different types of lighting. He had requisitioned a powerful microscope from the local university and was conducting detailed analysis of the photograph's surface, searching for any clue that might explain its extraordinary property. "There's something more to this photograph," he confided to Jean-Baptiste one evening as they dined in the hotel's small restaurant, a cozy establishment that had been serving travelers since the 80s. "Every time I look at it, I discover new details that I could swear weren't there before. The shadows seem to shift, the actor's expression changes subtly, and sometimes I think I can see other figures in the background that weren't visible initially." Jean-Baptiste, who was a professional photographer, had a trained eye for technical details and had spent years documenting archaeological discoveries across Europe, had reached the same disturbing conclusion. His own analysis of the photograph, using professional equipment, had yielded results that challenged everything he thought he knew about the medium. "I photographed thousands of historical images," he replied, lowering his voice so other diners couldn't hear their conversation. "But I've never seen a photograph that seemed alive. It's as if the image changes subtly every time we observe it. I've taken multiple photographs of the original, and each one shows slight variations that shouldn't be possible." Moreu had been more successful in her archival research, though what she discovered raised more questions than it answered. In the municipal records, she had found vague references to unauthorized activities at the theater during the autumn of 1918, but the details had been deliberately omitted or censored. However, she had discovered something more intriguing. Several police reports from the period mentioned nocturnal disturbances and inexplicable apparitions in the theater area. "Look at this," she said, spreading copies of yellow documents across the hotel table during their evening meeting. On October 23, 1918, local police received multiple reports from residents claiming to have seen lights and heard voices coming from the theater. When officers investigated, they found the place completely empty, but noted that the stage appeared to have been used recently. There were fresh flowers scattered across the performance area, and witnesses reported the lingering scent of stage makeup and perfume. The police reports painted a picture of a community living in fear of supernatural phenomena. Residents reported seeing a figure in white roaming the theater grounds at night, always alone, always performing for an invisible audience. Children claimed to hear applause echoing from the empty structure, and several witnesses described seeing torches burning on the stage when no human presence could be detected. Pierre Leclerc, who had become an invaluable source of local knowledge, had been collecting testimonies from Orange's eldest resident. His findings were both fascinating and disturbing, revealing a pattern of supernatural activity that had persisted for decades after Lucien Beaumont's disappearance. "He'd spoken with Madame Rousseau, who is 92 years old," he reported, his withered face grave with the weight of the stories he had collected. "She was a child in 1918, but clearly remembers her grandmother forbidding her to approach the theater after nightfall. She said the sad actor still performed his shows for the dead, and that anyone who watched his performance would be compelled to join his eternal audience." Other elderly residents had similar stories. Monsieur Dubois, the local baker's father, remembered his own father, speaking of strange lights and sounds emanating from the theater during the war years. Several families had reported encounters with a melancholy figure in white who would appear in their gardens, always reciting verses about lost love and the futility of war. Professor Dubois, despite his scientific skepticism, couldn't ignore the accumulation of anecdotal evidence. The consistency of the reports across multiple generations suggested something more than mere folklore or mass hysteria. He had decided to spend a complete night at the theater, armed with scientific measurement equipment and photographic cameras, to document any inexplicable phenomena that might occur. If there's a rational explanation for all this, he declared during a team meeting, his voice carrying the authority of decades of academic experience, we'll find it. And if there isn't, well, then we'll be documenting something truly extraordinary that could revolutionize our understanding of the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. The professor had contacted colleagues at the Sorbonne's Department of Experimental Psychology, requesting specialized equipment for measuring electromagnetic fields, temperature variations, and atmospheric pressure changes. He was determined to approach the investigation with the same scientific rigor that had made him one of France's most respected archaeologists. That night, as the team prepared for their nocturnal vigil, Marcel made another disturbing discovery. While examining the photograph under a desk lamp, he noticed that the actor's figure seemed to have changed position slightly. The white tunic now showed different folds, and the facial expression seemed more intense, more direct. Most unsettling of all, the actor's gaze now seemed to be directed specifically toward the corner of the stage where Marcel had found the metal box. "This is impossible," he murmured, calling Jean-Baptiste to witness the change. "Photographs don't change. It's physically impossible." Jean-Baptiste examined the image carefully, comparing it with the detailed notes and sketches he had made the previous day. His professional training had taught him to observe and record minute details, and what he saw challenged everything he believed about the nature of photographic images. "You're right," he admitted with a trembling voice that betrayed his growing unease. "The position of the left arm has changed. And look at his eyes. Now they seem to be looking directly toward the corner where you found the box. It's as if he's trying to guide us to something else." As the two men contemplated the implications of this discovery, a cold breeze swept through the hotel room, despite all windows being closed and the evening being unusually warm for September. In the distance, as if carried by the night wind, they could hear the faint echo of a male voice reciting verses in ancient French, the words barely audible but unmistakably theatrical in their delivery. The investigation had taken a turn that none of them had anticipated, and the line between science and the supernatural was beginning to blur disturbingly. Marcel spent the remainder of the evening documenting every aspect of the photograph, taking detailed measurements and notes about the actor's position, facial expression, and the arrangement of objects on the stage. He created a systematic record that would allow him to track any future changes with scientific precision. As midnight approached, both men felt an inexplicable urge to return to the theater, as if something was calling them back to the ancient stones where the mystery had begun. The photograph seemed to pulse us with an inner light, and they could swear they heard the distant sound of applause echoing through the night air, though no performance was scheduled at the theater for months to come. "I want to know how far this message is reaching. Comment below and tell me which city or country you're watching from." The night of September 20th, 1924, would be forever etched in the memory of the 5 members of the archaeological team. They had established their base camp in the theater's stands, with measurement equipment, photographic cameras, and battery-powered lanterns arranged in a semicircle around their observation point. Professor Dubois had insisted on maintaining a rigorous scientific record of any phenomena they might observe, treating the investigation with the same methodical approach he would apply to any archaeological excavation. The full moon illuminated the ancient stones with silver light that transformed the theater into a stage of supernatural beauty. The massive backdrop wall, with its intricate carvings and niches that had once held statues of Roman gods, seemed to come alive in the moonlight. Shadows lengthened and shortened with the movement of clouds, creating the illusion that statues and columns were coming to life, participating in some cosmic drama that transcended human understanding. The team had positioned themselves strategically throughout the theater. Professor Dubois occupied the central position with his array of scientific instruments, thermometers, barometers, electromagnetic field detectors, and a seismograph borrowed from the local university. Madame Sato is left with her notebooks and recording equipment, while Jean-Baptiste had established multiple camera positions to capture any phenomena from different angles. Marcel had positioned the Niña de 18 photograph on an improvised easel in the center of his work area, using it as a reference point for his observations. The image seemed to glow with an inner light under the moonbeams, and he found himself drawn to study it repeatedly throughout the evening. Pierre Leclerc, whose knowledge of local folklore made him an invaluable team member, positioned himself near the stage entrance, claiming that his grandmother had always said spirits preferred to enter through the same doors used by living performers. Morel was taking meticulous notes on temperature, humidity, and any changes in environmental conditions. Her scientific training had taught her to observe and record everything, no matter how seemingly insignificant. The atmosphere in the theater felt charged with potential, as if the ancient stones themselves were holding their breath in anticipation. Jean-Baptiste had his cameras prepared with different types of film, including some experimental plates he had obtained from a colleague in Paris who specialized in photographing low-light phenomena. He had also brought magnesium flash powder for emergency illumination, though he hoped not to disturb any manifestations with sudden bright lights. At 11:47 p.m., according to Professor Dubois's precision pocket watch, a gift from his mentor at the Sorbonne, the temperature suddenly dropped 10 degrees Celsius. All instruments registered the change simultaneously, ruling out the possibility of measurement error. The electromagnetic field detector began emitting a low humming sound, and the seismograph needle started vibrating despite the absence of any seismic activity in the region. "Do you feel that?" whispered Dr. Moreo, wrapping her woolen coat more tightly around her shoulders. Her breath now formed visible clouds in the suddenly frigid air, and she noticed that the usual night sounds, crickets, distant traffic, the rustle of leaves had completely ceased, as if nature itself was holding its breath. It wasn't just the cold. There was a presence in the air, a sensation that they were no longer alone in the theater. The very atmosphere seemed to thicken, becoming almost tangible, and each team member felt the weight of invisible eyes watching them from the shadows. Pierre Leclerc, who had remained silent for most of the night, slowly stood up, his weathered face pale in the moonlight, staring fixedly toward the stage. "He's here," he murmured in a barely audible voice that carried clearly in the supernatural silence. "Lucien is here. I can feel him, just like my grandmother described." The air itself is mourning. At first, they saw nothing more than the familiar shadows cast by moonlight on the ancient stone. But gradually, as if materializing from the very essence of the theater itself, a translucent figure began to appear center stage. It started as a barely perceptible shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, but slowly gained substance and definition. It was a young man dressed in a white Roman tunic that seemed to glow with its own ethereal light, exactly as depicted in. His appearance was so gradual that each observer later claimed to have been the first to notice him, though in reality he seemed to manifest simultaneously in all their perceptions, as if willing himself into their shared reality through sheer force of spiritual determination. Jean-Baptiste reacted instinctively, his professional training overriding his fear as he began firing his camera in rapid succession. The mechanical clicks of the shutter echoed through the theater like gunshots, and the brief flashes of the magnesium powder momentarily illuminated the entire structure in stark black and white. But the figure didn't disappear or fade as they might have expected. If anything, it seemed to become more solid, more real with each burst of light, as if the photographic process was somehow feeding its manifestation. The ghostly actor, for there was no longer any doubt that it was Lucien Beaumont, began moving across the stage with the fluid grace of an experienced performer. His movements were those of someone completely at home in the theatrical space, someone who had spent countless hours perfecting his craft on this very stage. His lips moved as if he were reciting lines, but initially no sound could be heard, creating the eerie impression of a silent film playing out before their eyes. Marcel consulted the photograph on his easel and was paralyzed by what he saw. The image had changed completely, more dramatically than any of the subtle alterations they had previously observed. Now it showed the empty stage, bathed in moonlight, as if the actor had literally stepped out of the photograph to appear in the real theater. The implications of this transformation sent chills down his spine that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold that had settled over the theater. Professor, he managed to articulate with a strangled voice, his scientific training warring with the evidence of his senses. The photograph, it's empty. He's come out of it. Professor Dubois, despite his scientific training and decades of rational thought, found himself completely fascinated by what he was witnessing. He was taking notes frantically, trying to document every detail of the phenomenon, but his hands trembled so much that his usually precise handwriting was barely legible. His instruments were recording unprecedented readings, electrometric fluctuations that defied explanation, temperature variations that seemed to follow no natural pattern, and atmospheric pressure changes that suggested the presence of something that existed outside normal physical laws. Gradually, as if adjusting to their presence or perhaps drawing in energy from their attention, the actor's voice began to become audible. He was reciting verses from Racine's Phaedra, his voice resonating with a beauty and sadness that transcended the human. The words seemed to float in the night air, filling the theater with a melancholy that touched the soul of each observer and spoke to universal themes of love, loss, and the tragic nature of human existence. The performance lasted exactly 37 minutes, according to Dr. Moreau's stopwatch, though each observer later claimed it felt both like an eternity and like mere moments. During that time, Lucien Beaumont interpreted scenes from various French classical works, Corneille, Molière, Racine, moving across the stage with a passion and intensity that suggested he was performing for a completed audience, invisible to mortal eyes but very real to him. His performance was not that of a mere ghost, going through remembered motions, but of an artist still driven by the need to create, to communicate, to touch hearts and minds through the power of dramatic art. Every gesture was deliberate, every word carefully chosen, every movement across the stage calculated for maximum emotional impact. When he finished his recitation, he walked directly toward where Marcel was sitting, his ethereal form seeming to glide rather than walk across the ancient stones. Looking at him with eyes that glowed with supernatural light, eyes that held depths of sorrow and longing, that spoke of years spent in limbo between worlds, Lucien fixed his gaze on the young archaeologist. For a moment that seemed eternal, actor and archaeologist looked directly at each other, and Marcel felt as if Lucien was trying to communicate something urgent, something important, that transcended the barriers between life and death. The connection was so intense that Marcel later described it as feeling like his soul was being read, as if every thought and emotion was laid bare before this being who existed beyond the normal constraints of mortality. Then, as gradually as he had appeared, the figure began to fade, but before disappearing completely, he pointed toward the photograph on the easel with a gesture that was both theatrical and deeply meaningful. When Marcel looked, he saw that the image had changed again. Now it showed Lucien in the center of the stage, but with a different expression, more urgent, more desperate, as if he were trying to transmit a message of vital importance. When the apparition completely vanished, the theater was plunged into a silence that seemed deeper than death itself. The normal night sounds gradually returned. Crickets resuming their chorus, the distant hum of the town settling into sleep, but the 5 team members remained motionless for several minutes, each processing what they had just witnessed in their own way. The temperature returned to normal as gradually as it had dropped, and the scientific instruments slowly returned to baseline readings. But the memory of what they had experienced would remain with each of them for the rest of their lives, fundamentally changing their understanding of the boundaries between the possible and impossible. Did we all see the same thing? Professor Dubois finally asked, his scientific voice struggling to maintain objectivity while his worldview underwent a fundamental transformation. All 5 nodded in silence, each knowing that they had witnessed something that defied all rational explanation, something that would forever change their understanding of the boundaries between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. They had become part of a mystery that stretched across decades, witnesses to a story that demanded to be told, participants in a drama that had been playing out in the shadows of history for 6 long years. The experience had shaken each team member to their core, but it had also filled them with a sense of purpose that transcended their original archaeological mission. Whatever Lucien Beaumont was trying to communicate, whatever truth he was desperate to reveal, they were determined to understand and help him find the peace he seemed to be seeking. The days following the first apparition were marked by feverish activity that consumed every waking moment of the archaeological team. Jean-Baptiste had developed his photographs from that night in the hotel's makeshift darkroom, working with chemicals he had specially ordered from Paris. The results were both fascinating and deeply disturbing, challenging everything the team thought they understood about the nature of photographic evidence. The images clearly showed Lucien Beaumont's figure on the stage, but with details that were impossible to explain through conventional means. In each successive photograph, the actor seemed to be looking more directly toward the camera, as if he were not only aware of being photographed, but was actively engaging with the process. Most unsettling of all, the photographs showed details that none of the observers had noticed during the actual apparition: background figures in the theater stands, additional props on the stage, and atmospheric effects that suggested the presence of an entire invisible cast and crew. Marcel had developed an almost pathological obsession with the he kept it constantly by his side, documenting every change he observed in the image, with the meticulous attention to detail that had made him a promising archaeologist. He had begun a comprehensive diary, recording not only the visual changes, but also the sensations, thoughts, and even dreams he experienced each time he examined the photograph. "It's as if he's trying to tell us a story," he explained to Dr. Moreau while they shared breakfast in the hotel's dining room, a charming space decorated with local pottery and faded photographs of Orange's history. Each change in the photographs seems deliberate, as if it were a chapter in a larger narrative. The actor's expressions, his gestures, even the lighting in the image, everything appears to be carefully orchestrated to convey specific information. Marcel had created a detailed chart tracking the photograph's transformations, noting correlations between the changes and external factors such as time of day, weather conditions, and the team's activities. The pattern that emerged suggested a level of consciousness and intentionality that defied rational explanation. Dr. Moreau had continued her research in the archives, but now with a different focus and a sense of urgency that had been absent from her initial investigation. Instead of looking for official records, she had begun examining personal diaries, letters and memoirs of Orange residents from the period. Her findings painted an increasingly clearer picture of the events of 1918. Revealing a community torn between loyalty and survival during the final months of the Great War. "I found the diary of Marguerite Dubois, a local seamstress who lived near the theater," she reported during the team's evening meeting in the hotel's small conference room. Her entries from October. She describes nocturnal encounters with a melancholic actor who appeared in her garden, always dressed in white, always reciting verses about lost love and death. But more importantly, she mentions that he seemed to be searching for something, or someone. The diary entries painted a picture of a man driven by grief and a desperate need for justice. Marguerite described how the ghostly figure would appear at her window, gesturing toward the theater and speaking in urgent whispers about the truth that must be told and the innocent who must be avenged. Their descriptions matched perfectly with the figure they had witnessed, down to the smallest details of his appearance and mannerisms. Pierre Leclerc had been investigating the local church records and civil documents, searching for any official information about Lucien Beaumont's life and death. What he had discovered was a story of love and tragedy that explained much about the apparitions, but also raised disturbing questions about the circumstances of the actor's disappearance. Lucien Beaumont revenait un arrive de noges en Logos à Cercire, he reported, spreading photocopies of official documents across the table. He was a Parisian actor who had lost his fiancée, Isabelle Moreau, in what was officially recorded as a German bombing raid. But I found evidence that suggests the truth was far more complex and sinister. According to Pierre's research, Lucien had been involved in resistance activities against the German occupation, using his theatrical connections to gather intelligence and coordinate underground operations. Isabelle Moreau had been a nurse who was secretly treating wounded resistance fighters, and her death had not been the result of random bombing, but a targeted assassination by French collaborators who had discovered her activities. The Paris records show that Lucien came here not just seeking refuge from grief, but following a specific lead about the people responsible for Isabelle's death, Pierre continued. He had traced several suspected collaborators to the Orange area and was conducting his own investigation when he disappeared. Professor Dubois had been analyzing Jean-Baptiste's photographs with specialized equipment he had requested from the Sorbonne's Department of Experimental Physics. The results of his technical analysis were bewildering and seemed to violate several fundamental principles of photographic science. The images are authentic, he declared, adjusting his spectacles as he studied the enlarged prints spread across his desk. There's no evidence of manipulation, double exposure, or any known photographic trickery, but there's something more. The photographs show light spectra that aren't visible to the human eye, electromagnetic signatures that suggest the presence of energy fields we don't yet understand. It's as if Lucien exists in a different frequency of reality, one that our instruments can detect, but our eyes cannot fully perceive. The professor had also discovered something else in the photographs that had initially escaped notice. In the background of several images, barely visibly beyond magnification, were what appeared to be other figures, shadowy forms, that seemed to be watching the performance from the theater's upper levels. These figures were too indistinct to identify, but their presence suggested that Lucien's performances were indeed being witnessed by an invisible audience. That night, the team decided to conduct a second vigil, but this time with a different approach that reflected their growing understanding of the phenomenon they were investigating. Instead of simply observing, they would attempt to communicate directly with Lucien, treating him not as a supernatural curiosity, but as a person with a story to tell and a message to convey. Marcel had prepared a series of questions written in 19th century French, hoping that the language and style of the period would facilitate communication. He had also brought writing materials, thinking that if direct vocal communication proved difficult, they might be able to establish some form of written dialogue. The apparition began at precisely the same time as the previous night, 11:47 p.m., with the same dramatic drop in temperature and electromagnetic disturbances. But this time, Lucien seemed more solid, more present, as if their previous attention had somehow strengthened his ability to manifest in the reality. His eyes immediately directed toward Marcel, as if he had been waiting for this encounter, and recognized the young archaeologist as someone who might finally be able to help him. Marcel slowly stood up, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement, as he held his prepared questions. The scientific part of his mind marveled at the opportunity to conduct what might be the first documented interview with a spirit, while the human part of him was moved by the obvious pain and desperation in the ghostly actor's eyes. Lucien Beaumont, he said with a clear voice that carried across the ancient theater. If you can hear us, if you can understand us, please give us a sign. The response was immediate and dramatic, exceeding all their expectation. Lucien moved the center of the stage with purposeful strides and began to recite, but this time his words weren't from classical works. It was an original monologue, a passionate confession about his life, his death, and the reason his spirit remained bound to the theater. His voice carried clearly across the theater, filled with an urgency and desperation that spoke of years of frustrated attempts to communicate his story. "I have waited 6 years to tell my story," he recited with a voice that resonated with pain and urgency, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. 6 years trapped between two worlds, performing for audiences of shadows, seeking someone who could hear the truth about my end, someone who could ensure that justice is finally served. Moreo was taking notes frantically, her pen racing across the pages as she tried to capture every word of this unprecedented testimony from beyond the grave. What Lucien was revealing was a story of love, betrayal, and murder that had been buried along with his body somewhere in the theater, a tale of corruption and collaboration that had remained hidden for 6 years. "Isabel didn't die in a bombing," he continued, his ethereal form moving across the stage with the passion of a man driven by love and the need for justice. "She was murdered by collaborators who discovered our resistance activities. They killed her to silence her, and when I came here following their trail, seeking evidence to expose their crimes, they found me first. They killed me here, on this sacred stage, during what they thought would be my last performance." Marcel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold that had settled over the theater. The 1918 photograph on his easel had begun changing again, but this time more dramatically than ever before. The image was transforming into a series of scenes, like frames from a film, showing different moments from that fateful night in 1918. Lucien arriving at the theater, meeting with shadowy figures, and finally lying motionless on the stage floor while his killers buried evidence of their crimes. "My body is buried beneath the stage," Lucien revealed, pointing to a specific location with theatrical precision, "along with the evidence of the crimes I came to expose, documents, photographs, correspondence that proves the extent of the collaboration network that operated in this region. Until my story is told, until justice is done, until the truth is revealed and the innocent are vindicated, I cannot rest." The performance continued for more than an hour, with Lucien relating specific details about his investigation of the collaborator network, providing names, dates, and locations with the precision of a trained intelligence operative. He described hidden meeting places, secret codes, and a web of corruption that had extended far beyond Orange to include officials in Paris and other major cities. When he finally began to fade away, he left the team with a clear mission that would transform their archaeological expedition into something far more significant. Find his body, recover the evidence he had died trying to protect, expose the truth about his murder, and give him the rest he had sought for 6 long years. Archaeology had taken a completely unexpected turn, becoming a criminal investigation that transcended the barriers of time and death. A quest for justice that would ultimately reshape their understanding of history, truth, and the power of love to persist beyond the grave. The morning of September 2nd dawned gray and rainy, as if the sky itself reflected the gravity of the task facing the archaeological team. Based on the specific indications Lucien had provided during his apparition, Professor Dubois had obtained special permits from local authorities to excavate in the theater's stage area. The process had required delicate negotiations with municipal officials, the French Ministry of Culture, and local police, all of whom were skeptical but intrigued by the team's claims. Marcel had spent the entire night meticulously transcribing every word of Lucien's monologue, creating a detailed map of the locations the spirit had described with the precision of a military intelligence report. The 1918 photograph had continued its transformations throughout the night, now showing a sequence of images that appeared to be specific memories, faces of men, Lucien, identified as collaborators, interior shots of meeting places, and most disturbing of all, scenes of violence that had been carefully hidden from official records. According to Lucien's indications, Marcel explained to the assembled team as they prepared for the excavation, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had become the primary interpreter of the ghost's communications. His body is buried 3 meters east of the stage center, at a depth of approximately 2 meters. Along with him, we should find a leather suitcase containing documents, photographs, and correspondence proving the collaboration network that operated in this region. The excavation site had been carefully prepared according to archaeological standards, with a grid system established to ensure precise documentation of any discoveries. Moreo had contacted Orange's police authorities, informing them about the possible discovery of evidence related to war crimes. Although initially skeptical, Professor Dubois' academic reputation and the extraordinary nature of the claims had convinced authorities to allow the excavation to proceed under official supervision. Inspector Claude Moreo of the Orange Police, no relation to Dr. Elise Moreo, had arrived with a small team of officers and a representative from the regional prosecutor's office. The inspector was a methodical man in his 50s who had seen enough in his career to keep an open mind about unusual circumstances, though he admitted privately that this was the strangest case he had ever been asked to oversee. Jean-Baptiste documented each stage of the excavation process with his cameras, creating a comprehensive visual record that would be crucial for validating any discoveries. He had also brought motion picture equipment borrowed from a colleague in Paris, recognizing that this might be the first time archaeological evidence had been discovered through supernatural guidance. Pierre Leclerc had brought additional excavation equipment and recruited several local workers whose families had lived in Orange for generations, men who understood the historical significance of what they were attempting. The excavation began at 8:30 a.m., with the team working in careful shifts to preserve any evidence they might find. As they dug deeper into the stage floor, removing centuries of accumulated debris and sediment, the tension increased palpably. Each shovelful of removing brought them closer to the truth Lucien had been trying to reveal for 6 years, and each team member felt the weight of responsibility for uncovering evidence that could rewrite the history of the region. The work was painstaking and methodical, following archaeological protocols that ensured every artifact would be properly documented and preserved. Professor Dubois supervised the excavation. With the same attention to detail he would apply to any Roman site, despite the unusual circumstances that had led them to this moment. At 12:30 p.m., Marcel's carefully wielded trowel struck something solid that was clearly neither stone nor natural earth. With his heart beating rapidly and his hands trembling with anticipation, he began carefully excavating around the object, using brushes and delicate tools to avoid damaging what might be crucial evidence. What emerged was exactly what Lucien had described, a leather suitcase, deteriorated by time and moisture, but surprisingly well preserved considering its 6-year burial. Professor Dubois. Marcel shouted, his voice carrying across the excavation site and drawing the attention of everyone present. "We found it. The suitcase is here, exactly where he said it would be." The team gathered around the find, while police authorities and the prosecutor's representative observed from a respectful distance, their skepticism gradually giving way to amazement as the supernatural guidance proved accurate. With cotton gloves and extreme care, Professor Dubois opened the suitcase under the watchful eyes of Inspector Moreau and the official photographer who had been assigned to document any evidence. Inside they found exactly what Lucien had promised: a treasure trove of documents, photographs, letters, and detailed lists revealing an extensive network of collaboration with German occupation forces. The materials were organized with the precision of a professional intelligence operative, suggesting that Lucien had been far more than just an actor seeking personal revenge. The documents were in French and German, dated between 1917 and 1918, and included material that would have been considered high treason at the time. There were deportation orders signed by French officials, lists of local Jews, and resistance members marked for arrest, correspondence between French collaborators and German officers discussing the division of confiscated property, and most shocking of all, photographs of executions and deportations that had been documented as trophies by the perpetrator. "This is evidence of war crimes on a massive scale," murmured Dr. Moreau, examining the documents with a mixture of horror and professional fascination. Lucien had gathered sufficient proof to expose the entire regional collaborator network. No wonder they killed him. This evidence would have destroyed dozens of prominent families and sent many people to prison, or worse. Inspector Moreau examined the documents with the trained eye of a career police officer, immediately recognizing their significance and authenticity. "These names," he said quietly, "some of these families are still prominent in regional politics. This evidence could have implications that extend far beyond historical interest." But the excavation wasn't finished. Following Lucien's specific indications, they continued digging until they encountered human remains. The skeleton was remarkably well preserved, still clothed in the deteriorated remains of a white tunic that matched exactly the ghost's appearance. The preservation was so complete that even facial features were partially recognizable, confirming beyond doubt that they had found Lucien Bayeux. The examination of the remains by a forensic expert who had been summoned from Marseille revealed clear evidence of violence. Skull fractures, consistent with a severe blow from a blunt instrument, and the position of the skeleton indicated that he had been buried quickly and without ceremony. The killer, or killers, had clearly been in a hurry, more concerned with hiding the evidence than with showing any respect for their victim. Next to the body, they found personal objects that provided final confirmation of the identity. A pocket watch engraved with the initials and the Teponiro's engagement to Isabel. A ring containing a miniature photograph of a young woman whose beauty was still visible despite the deterioration of the image. And a theater program from his last performance in Paris, dated July 1918, just weeks before his arrival in Orange. While the official forensic team took charge of the remains and evidence, something extraordinary began to happen that was witnessed by everyone present. The 1918 photograph that Marcel had been monitoring began changing one final time, but this transformation was different from all the previous ones. The image was clearing, becoming sharper and more detailed, and Lucien's expression had changed from desperate urgency to serene peace. "Look at this," Marcel said, drawing everyone's attention to the photograph. "It's as if he knows we found what he was looking for. The desperation is gone from his face. He looks relieved." Inspector Moreau, despite his professional skepticism, found himself staring at the photograph with amazement. "I've been a police officer for 30 years, he said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like this. If I hadn't witnessed it myself, I would never believe that a photograph could change like that." That night, while authorities processed the evidence and representatives from the national media began arriving to report on the extraordinary discovery, the team conducted one final vigil at the theater. They knew instinctively that this would be different from the previous encounters, that their mission was nearing completion. Lucien appeared for the final time at 11:47 p.m., but now his form was more translucent, more ethereal, as if the discovery of his body and evidence had begun the process of releasing him from his earthly bonds. His white tunic glowed with golden light instead of the previous silver radiance, and his face showed an expression of deep gratitude and final peace that brought tears to the eyes of several team members. He approached each team member individually, moving with the grace of someone who was finally free from the burden that had kept him earthbound for 6 years. To each person, he offered a gesture of thanks, a bow to Professor Dubois, a gentle touch Moreau's shoulder, a salute to Jean-Baptiste, a handshake to Pierre. When he reached Marcel, he extended his ghostly hand, and for an impossible moment that defied all physical laws, Marcel felt actual physical contact. a sensation of warmth and recognition that transcended the barrier between life and death. "Merci," Lucien whispered, his voice now barely audible but filled with infinite gratitude. "The truth has been revealed. Justice will be served. Isabel and I can finally rest together in peace." With these words he began to fade. But this time the process was different from his previous disappearances. Instead of simply vanishing, his form gradually rose, as if carried upward by invisible light that seemed to emanate from the theater itself. In his last moments of visibility, another figure briefly appeared beside him, a young woman with dark hair and a white dress, whose beauty was ethereal and timeless. She took his hand with a gesture of infinite tenderness, as both figures faded into golden light that seemed to bless the ancient theater. The 1918 photograph underwent its final transformation. Now it showed the empty stage, bathed in golden light that seemed to emanate from within the image itself, with two translucent figures walking toward the background. Hand in hand, finally free from the bonds that had kept them separated by death and injustice. The months following the discovery transformed not only the lives of the archaeological team, but also the official history of Orange and the surrounding region, creating ripples that extended far beyond the ancient theater, where it all began. The evidence found in Lucien Beaumont's suitcase led to a massive historical investigation that exposed a collaboration network that had remained hidden for 6 years, revealing the extent to which ordinary citizens had been complicit in the horrors of the occupation. The documents and photographs provided irrefutable proof of crimes that had been carefully covered up after the war, when many collaborators had successfully reinvented themselves as patriots and resistance heroes. Several prominent families in the region found their carefully constructed post-war reputations destroyed as the truth about their wartime activities came to light. The evidence led to the posthumous vindication of dozens of resistance fighters who had been betrayed and executed, finally giving their families the recognition and closure they had sought for years. Marcel Fontaine had been profoundly transformed by the experience, finding that his encounter with the supernatural had fundamentally changed his approach to archaeology and his understanding of the relationship between past and present. He abandoned traditional archaeological methods to specialize in what he called paranormal archaeology, developing new techniques for investigating historical sites where traumatic events had left supernatural impressions. His methodology combined rigorous scientific documentation with an openness to phenomena that couldn't be explained through conventional means. His book about the Orange experience, The Phantom Actor, an investigation between two worlds, became an international bestseller and established a new field of academic study that attracted scholars from around the world. The book was translated into dozens of languages and inspired a generation of researchers to explore the intersection between history, consciousness, and the paranormal. Marcel's works demonstrated that supernatural phenomena, when properly documented and investigated, could provide valuable historical insights that might otherwise remain hidden forever. Elise Moreu used her experience to develop revolutionary new methods of historical research that combined traditional archaeological techniques with testimonies from paranormal sources. Her pioneering work in supernatural evidential history opened new possibilities for solving historical mysteries that had remained unsolved for decades, if not centuries. She established a research institute dedicated to investigating cases where supernatural phenomena might provide clues to historical events, attracting funding from universities and government agencies interested in exploring unconventional approaches to historical research. Her methodology was rigorous and scientific, requiring multiple forms of corroboration before accepting any supernatural testimony as historically valid. The Orange case became the gold standard for such investigations, demonstrating that paranormal phenomena could be documented, verified, and used to uncover historical truths that had been deliberately hidden or accidentally lost. Jean-Baptiste Rousseau became the world's leading expert in paranormal photography, developing specialized techniques for capturing supernatural phenomena that were adapted by researchers around the globe. His photographs of Lucien's apparition were exhibited in museums worldwide and became scientific evidence of life after death, challenging materialist assumptions about consciousness and survival. He established a laboratory dedicated to the study of paranormal photography, working with physicists and consciousness researchers to understand the mechanisms by which spiritual entities could imprint themselves on photographic media. His technical innovations included new types of photographic plates sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies beyond the normal visible spectrum, allowing researchers to capture images of phenomena that were invisible to the naked eye. The techniques he developed were eventually adopted by mainstream science for studying various forms of energies that had previously been undetectable. Professor Henri Dubois, despite his advanced age, experienced an intellectual renewal that led him to establish the first university department dedicated to the scientific study of paranormal phenomena. His rigorous scientific approach legitimized a field that had previously been relegated to the realm of superstition and pseudoscience, attracting serious researchers from multiple disciplines, including physics, psychology, anthropology, and neuroscience. The department he founded at the Sorbonne became a model for similar programs at universities around the world, establishing protocols for the scientific investigation of supernatural phenomena that maintained academic credibility while remaining open to possibilities that challenged conventional understanding. His work demonstrated that paranormal research could be conducted with the same rigor and objectivity applied to any other scientific endeavor. Pierre Leclerc became the official guardian of the Roman theater of Orange, dedicating his life to preserving both the site's ancient history and the modern history of Lucien Beaumont. He established a comprehensive museum in the theater that documented both traditional archaeological findings and the supernatural events of 90s trouble, creating an educational experience that attracted visitors from around the world. The museum included interactive exhibits that allowed visitors to experience recreations of the supernatural phenomena using advanced technology to simulate the environmental conditions present during the apparition. Pierre also established an annual festival commemorating Lucien Beaumont and all victims of wartime collaboration, featuring theatrical performances that honored the memory of those who had died seeking justice. The theater itself experienced a remarkable transformation that reflected its dual nature as both an ancient monument and a site of modern supernatural significance. French authorities, recognizing the historical and cultural importance of the discovery, invested in a complete restoration that respected both the original Roman architecture and Lucien Beaumont's memory. The restoration was carried out using traditional techniques and materials, ensuring that the theater's ancient character was preserved while making it accessible to modern visitors. A commemorative plaque was installed at the exact location where Lucien's body had been found, honoring both his memory and that of Isabelle Morel. The inscription, written in French, Latin, and English, read, "Here lies Lucien Beaumont, actor and patriot who died seeking justice for the innocent. His love for Isabelle Morel and his dedication to truth transcended death itself, reminding us that some bonds cannot be broken by time or mortality." The 1918 photograph, which had been the catalyst for the entire investigation, was donated to the National Museum of France, where it occupies a place of honor in a special hall dedicated to paranormal evidence in French history. The photograph is displayed in a climate-controlled case with detailed documentation of its transformations, providing visitors with a complete record of how it changed throughout the investigation. Curiously, the photograph never changed again after Lucien's last apparition, remaining fixed in its final image of peace and resolution. The events in Orange attracted international attention from paranormal researchers, historians, scientists, and journalists, establishing the case as a landmark in the study of supernatural phenomena. The thorough documentation provided by the archaeological team created an unprecedented record of paranormal activity that met the highest standards of scientific evidence.